Hey, learning nerds. Today's episode is brought to you by Pull Everywhere. If you have attended any of my webinars or workshops lately, you know that I love to use Pull Everywhere. It's a tool that allows presenters to ask live questions and captures real-time responses. I've used it for polls, multiple choice questions, word clouds, icebreakers, and more. It integrates with tools like PowerPoint, Zoom, Google Slides, and even learning management systems. And my favorite part is the versatility because I've used Pull Everywhere in my online courses as well as in-person events. Try out a semester of Pull Everywhere for free by visiting drlukehobson.com/Pull Everywhere. And now, let's start the show. Hello, learning nerds, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast that you're going to hear today. I'm your host. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I am obsessed with instructional design, and that's why I made an instructional design podcast. And my purpose, folks, is to be able to share with you as much as possible about teaching, about learning, and about designing learning experiences. How do we make them meaningful, relevant, and interesting for our audience? How do we focus on the goals, make the impacts, and everything of the sort that we are looking for? And of course, you can find all of the incredibly fabulous resources that I have for you over at drlukehobson.com. And I want to start today's podcast with a question for you. What do you think higher education leaders are actually trying to learn about with Gen AI? I've seen post after post on LinkedIn speculating the future of AI and where is this all going to go. And I'm not going to lie, I'm in the same camp. I'm trying to wrap my head around everything and trying to be able to predict about 2026 and in the future. But before I got ahead of myself, I decided to pause and reflect and think back to this last year because I had so many opportunities to lead workshops and webinars for universities who asked me to come in and speak about generative AI to either their faculty, to their administrators, their instructional designers. And as we know, the past can certainly teach us quite a bit about the present and about the future. So on today's episode, I thought it would be fun just to chat about the top 5 requests that I heard from higher education leaders in 2025 who were trying to learn as much as they could about Gen AI. So I broke these down into different themes and then I compiled them. And then after looking at all of the data and analyzing everything, really just thinking of common sense and to say like, yeah, these were definitely the rankings of what folks asked me about. So let's get started. Number 1 has to be, where does Gen AI fit into designing learning experiences? And this one should not come as a surprise to any of you, but many universities and even companies are trying to figure out how do they incorporate Gen AI into the different types of processes and workflows. Some universities seem to be focusing on specific areas of ADDIE. So I heard from some people that they're focusing more on analysis. Other teams are focusing more on evaluation methods. And for most of them, I would say that they were somewhere in the middle with thinking about the design and the development stages. What's interesting, though, is that for many of the universities that I spoke with, they've already done their homework. They've experimented with different types of tools, but they didn't get the results that they were looking for. So that's kind of where I came into the picture. There were very few times that I could think of where someone reached out to me saying that we have literally no idea. We are starting with a blank slate. Please help us. Very, very few requests, something like that. So what I then heard, and then we kind of did like discovery calls to be able to learn more, was that for a lot of them, they tried out something like with using ChatGPT for the very first time, or they tried to be able to make a avatar video with like a robotic voiceover and it felt clunky. And overall, it was the sense that people were not impressed by the results, and they figured there had to be something else out there in order to get a higher quality type of a impact. So during these workshops that focused on using AI to essentially improve assessments and trying to be able to improve the overall learning experience, I really went to be able to share with them all the different types of various tools that I've been using. So thinking about storytelling, custom GPTs, voice translation, video generation, adaptive learning, flexible pathways, simulations, universal design for learning, and where do all these different types of ideas fit in? And any of these topics gave educators a sense around where AI could actually make a difference, and it became much more tangible. So we're not just talking about a theory or a strategy, but actually diving into the tools to be able to say that, like, hey, I'm currently experimenting with trying to turn my courses into Spanish. So I am using HeyGen and I'm translating all of my videos, and here's what it looks like. That is going to be able to give something for someone to be able to chew on, to think about, and then to be able to think back into their classrooms and what actually they could do. The next one has to be ethical AI use. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at Innovate Ed, a conference held by Stanford Center for Continuing Medical Education, and the event organizer mentioned that I had almost 3 hours to work with participants. And while at first that amount of time was rather daunting, especially for a virtual workshop, but it gave me the opportunity to really dive on into the pros and the cons of AI. Everyone wants to hear about the innovative, flashy, amazing ideas that we can do with AI, and totally, I absolutely get that. But there are several drawbacks of using this technology and having this much time for a workshop. What I decided to do was that I split up the workshop into half being about the positives of AI and half really focusing on the drawbacks. And I mean this. When I say this, it felt like the most complete workshop I have hosted in a long, long time. Now, this is not to say, to be super clear, if you want me to come and do a workshop with your folks, I don't need 3 hours. I promise you, I truly don't need 3 hours. But this time frame, it allowed me to be able to think outside the box to say, what am I going to talk about for 3 hours? Like, that is, especially if you're on Zoom with me, I gotta really be not just informative and educational, but I need to be entertaining at the same time. And of course, there were activities and there was breaks and everything that you're probably thinking about. But this gave me the opportunity to say that, hey, Luke, in a perfect world, if you had more time to talk about AI, where would you go? What path would you explore? And it's like, oh, I would explore the parts that aren't fun to talk about, like deepfakes, intellectual property theft, student data, student privacy, environmental issues, layoffs. All of these are cause for concern that people really don't want to pay attention to, but we absolutely should be. And the big lesson that I was trying to be able to convey, not just talking about all these scary things, but it's to also say, if AI is going to be incorporated into design practices, it has to be done so with intentionality and meticulously studied and tested. And just because it worked one time, it doesn't mean that it's going to work again. There needs to be a human in the loop for every checkpoint and to know what exactly are you signing up for. There also should be multiple parties involved to think about all the risks so that way you can hear from every perspective, and being able to share real life examples where things really went off the tracks and they didn't go so well. That felt great to be able to share. Not to scare faculty or to scare the instructional designers, but to say, hey, here are some real case studies. Let's talk about what exactly happened. What would you do if you were in this person's situation? And how should we be thinking about these things a little bit differently? The next topic is plagiarism and reimagining assessments. So plagiarism has always been a cause for concern for educators. This is not going to disappear anytime soon, and I'm pretty sure that when ChatGPT first came into the scenes, this is immediately where many people flock towards, is saying, oh my God, it is the end of critical thinking and decision making, and what are we going to do? What about plagiarism? And one of the things that people then tried to be able to incorporate more of was AI detectors, like with Turnitin, and there's a few other ones, ChatGPT 0, there's a few other ones, whatever they're called. But the thing is that none of them work. So they're essentially about as accurate as lie detectors. Lie detectors don't work, by the way. Fun fact, if you haven't heard about that before. But many educators, they feel like they're fighting a losing battle, and there's nothing that they could do. And this was kind of like one of the first lines of defense, but it's not the right approach. And something that I found fascinating, and I shared this article recently on LinkedIn, was an NYU professor who is taking the stance of fighting fire with fire and using oral exams with his students. It was a fascinating read. I will put it down below in the show notes for you to be able to check out. And I would certainly encourage you to be able to read it. So really good discussions from folks who commented on that post already. The topic of plagiarism extended far beyond the normal copying and pasting with prompts when ChatGPT's Atlas and Perplexity's Comet created a whole new way of cheating. Yay for 2025. If you haven't seen this yet already, these are browsers that have AI agents embedded inside of them that can perform tasks when you give them permission to control your screen. They were designed to be able to book flights and plan out your vacations easier. And instead, they are now being used to complete entire online courses with a simple prompt. And while this might not have a huge impact for face-to-face educators yet's the key word there, it's definitely coming with other types of technology, like with meta glasses. Google that. It's pretty scary where that's all going. So, what do we do? My suggestion was to refocus and to give our attention to rethinking about assessments. View this as an opportunity. We can do quite a bit with making assessments AI proof as possible, or at least somewhat AI resistant. And I wrote an article about this called 5 AI proof assessment ideas, and this gained quite a bit of traction. Some of these ideas were even featured in Inside Higher Ed and other various university websites, which I have now seen have linked to this post for trying to be able to help out with their faculty and instructional design team. And truthfully, when it comes to my ideas around AI resistant assessments, nothing's going to be AI proof anymore, so I'm already changing how I phrase this, is that there was nothing groundbreaking with my ideas. There was nothing magical about them. It was with teach-back sessions, recorded journals, interviews, reflections, critiquing AI, focusing on community-based learning. So nothing in there is this like, oh my God, Luke invented the brand new blah, blah, blah. But where those suggestions make a difference is that they aren't a far stretch away from what educators are doing right now. If you ask a professor to tear down an entire course to the studs because everything is essentially useless at this point in time, and then you ask them to be able to start all up again and reimagine everything from scratch, that's a tall task. They're not going to do that. Asking them to modify existing assessments into a different version, that faces a lot less resistance, hence trying to be able to reimagine the assessments that someone already has. And once again, just to be extremely clear, I am not blaming students for trying out this type of technology and seeing what it can do. Truthfully, I can't imagine being a student right now. If I was going back in high school in this day and age and knowing that there was like a literal easy button that's on my browser, that's not fair. That is just not great to be able to have. And truthfully, it's something that our kids should not have. I cannot imagine what my daughter's education is going to be like. She's 7 months old. I cannot imagine what schooling is going to be like by the time that she gets into K through 12 and high school and everything. It's just going to be absolutely insane to be able to think about. And I know from speaking with many students, and especially speaking with my EDD students, is that they're like, I'm sick of AI. I don't want to talk about AI anymore. And I'm like, I don't blame you one bit. And truthfully, I'm sick of talking about AI. I feel like it's all that I've been talking about for the last 3 years or so, maybe longer at this point in time. But it's where folks need the most amount of help. So I will gladly stick in the flames if it means being able to support you, because this is challenging and trying to be able to figure this all out, which maybe you're picking up on this at this point in time in the podcast episode, is that no one truly knows what to do. This is all new territory for us that we have found ourselves thrown into, and we're trying to be able to all figure it out together. So this is quite a journey. The next topic is ongoing AI adoption. For many universities, 2025 was the year of making a decision on AI adoption, and there seems to be three different camps. I heard about zero AI tolerance, a moderate amount with specific types of circumstances, or full AI adoption. Understandably, I don't receive many requests from the zero AI tolerance group. Where I heard from the most was the moderate group. In these universities, you had many people on the fence about certain ideas or were comfortable with some, but not all. They were willing to try and experiment, but they needed a helping hand with getting their faculty to see the use cases, and an outside perspective can go a long way. For these institutions, they were the ones who purchased many licenses for an LLM, and they were trying to get the instructors to do more with them and to essentially buy into the idea. What I found the most interesting with these universities was how they set up their AI policies. For most cases, it was up to the individual instructor to create and enforce an AI policy. They were expected to place the policy in the syllabus and then to speak about it during class. So that's why it was so important to get people to buy into it, because nothing was essentially locking them in to having to use AI or not. It was all up to the individual. And to be honest, I'm a bit conflicted with this approach because personally, I prefer a more cohesive plan, because the ones who suffer the most from this type of changing things from every single class, the ones who suffer the most are the students. And I can't imagine how confusing it has to be where you enroll into a series of courses and then each course has their own AI policy. And I've experienced this in my own students where they thought AI was going to be completely banned from my courses. And then, like, surprise, surprise, I'm teaching them how to use AI into their designs. And they're like, wait, this is not at all what I thought was going to be like for this course. And it's like, yeah, well, I can understand why that is extremely confusing, because the last course that you took with somebody said that they did not want to use AI at all, or they had kind of odd circumstances with how to use AI. I've seen some things where I'm like, never in a million years would I think about asking students to be able to use ChatGPT in a certain manner. And I'm like, I don't get why. That is like, all right, whatever. At the same time, though, the one size fits all model, it's not going to work because some subject matter doesn't have a use case for AI. And making faculty to be forced and backed into a corner to be able to say, but you have to use AI for things, sometimes it just literally doesn't make sense to be able to do this at all. And I've seen some instructors in the very same department debate about this as far as for, can we come to a unified answer? And they're like, yeah, of course we can. We're going to use nothing with AI. And then I would see the other half of the group to say, no, we came to the conclusion that we should all use AI in this manner. And they could not vote on a singular use case. So it's difficult. I've also seen and talked to many professors who felt one way about AI at the beginning, and now they have a completely different stance years later. And I've also seen this happen too with both sides. I have seen some people who were all in on AI. They couldn't wait to dive on in to get their hands dirty, to be able to experiment this technology in their classroom. And then over time, they were like, you know what? I don't think this is in the best interest for the students, for their learning, for society. I'm all set. And then I've also spoken with other folks who have come to me and said, Luke, I now see the light. I hated everything about AI. This was all terrible. It's all garbage. And hey, I found some different types of use cases for my students and things are going well. So it's rather challenging. And I really respect those who change their mind after gathering more facts, after more experimentation and trying things out, and then they come to an overall conclusion. And perhaps it was not the original conclusion that they had at the beginning, because that shows growth. It shows change. So I think that's great to be able to do. And last, but absolutely not least, because this was requested quite a bit too, was how to stay current. I co-hosted a workshop for one university's faculty around using AI and universal design for learning in their courses. And I had all day to spend with them. I traveled to the university. I couldn't wait to share about how I have been using AI to make my learning experiences more universal, more accessible. So to start off the workshop, I used Pull Everywhere and I asked them to scan the QR code and then to tell me what one word came to mind when I said generative AI. Excitedly, I watched as the word cloud appeared, and the very first two submissions were evil and retirement. And then I laughed nervously, as this was not how I expected this 6-hour workshop to go. However, this led to a great early initial conversation to hear about their fears and their apprehensions, resistance around everything for AI, before then going on into the lecture material. Because if I had just taken the assumption that everyone was all aboard the AI train and I just went full steam ahead, and then come to find out that half of the room was like, I hate AI, that would have been a little bit of a challenge to pull off that kind of workshop. And the more that the faculty were able to talk about this at the very beginning, I could just tell that they were getting this stuff off of their chest and they've been holding it in for a long time. It's been something that they were dying to be able to do. And this gave them the platform in front of all their other colleagues to be able to talk about this. And it seemed like they didn't have the space or the time to be able to do so. So it was great to be able to have this conversation and then to go on into what we originally had for the types of presentations and the workshop activities and everything of a sort. And also, I can now figure out how to be able to address their concerns as I was presenting live in real time. And by the way, you'll see me use this exact same technique with Pull Everywhere during my next workshop with D2L. It's all about using AI to design learning experiences in a practical way for higher education. So make sure that you sign up for that. Happening soon, February 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Once again, I'll put that down inside of the show notes. And where that story kind of fits in with everything was that it was common to hear, and it's been common to hear from many institutions, is that they tried out a tool early on when it came out, and then they stopped keeping track. And then they had no idea that new capabilities came out and there were new features, and all of a sudden they felt lost. And they're like, well, wait a second, like, how do I stay up to date when I thought that we were on this version and now we're on this version over here? I talked to one professor recently that we were chatting after one of these workshops, and he kept on telling me about how he still is so annoyed of ChatGPT because it creates fake citations. And when he said that, I was like, it creates fake citations. And I was like, when was the last time you tried to use ChatGPT? And he's like, I don't know, about like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I was like, oh, yeah. It's like, well, they got rid of that with one of their updates because now it connects to the internet. So there's a far less chance of it giving you a fake citation. And that's when he looked at me and he's like, I had no idea. I was like, well, yeah, sure. If this is not your world and you're not trying to be able to stay on top of the latest and greatest with LLMs today, then yeah, it's pretty hard to be able to keep up. And this theme emerged from universities, and what I would hear from them is that they would say that they invited a speaker 3 months ago or 6 months ago, and now they're inviting me to be able to come and to give a talk. And one of the things that they asked about was to say, you need to include the latest and the greatest. We've already had people talk about X, Y, and Z. Please talk about what is relevant for today's day and age for our faculty. And it's like, sure, I'll talk about Nano Banana. I will share with you the latest on how to do mind mapping with Notebook LM. And let's talk about Storybook and what that looks like to do scenario-based learning. And I just literally time-stamped myself by mentioning these 3 things. So whenever this episode comes out, you'll be like, oh yeah, Luke talked about this in January 2026. So those are the main 5 themes that I could think of around Gen AI. Where are we going in 2026? I don't know. I wish I knew, to be very honest with you. From looking at everything, I still am firmly in the camp of video generation getting better and better. Voice generation is certainly getting crazy with how much more accurate the results are now compared to what they were previously. I really do think that we are going to be able to have a translate my course into another language button at some point in time soon. And that includes the videos, because I know for some learning management systems, I know that Brightspace can translate a transcript into a different language, but I mean like everything just gets, boom, instantly translated into something else. We'll obviously need human checkers and everything of a sort, but I think we're going to be getting there at some point in time soon. Google is also constantly innovating. I know I mentioned a few of their things on today's episode. They also have a tool that is not yet accessible for all, but you can currently see it, called Learn Your Way, which is taking personalized learning and AI and trying to be able to adapt curricula into the interest of the learner. And you can go on their website and see this. So if I said that I'm a 9th grader, I'm passionate about skateboarding, it can modify the content to literally be around what a 9th grader who is interested in skateboarding is going to be interested in pertaining to that subject matter, which is pretty interesting. But I've been talking way too long for this episode, so I'm going to wrap things up. Folks, I hope you did enjoy today's episode and recapping the last year and talking about generative AI, and we'll see where things go for 2026 and beyond. If you enjoyed this episode, guess what I would love for you to do? Rate this podcast a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. Subscribe, follow along. This podcast is also now on YouTube. I didn't realize that YouTube now has a podcast player. That's my bad. Did not know that was a thing. So I uploaded that. So every episode of the podcast is now on YouTube, which it was not before. So now Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and probably other places that I don't know about currently have this podcast being played. Once again, next workshop, February 12th, 2 p.m. Free to be able to sign up. Go down below inside of the show notes to be able to check that out. And of course, if you have any questions for me, Luke at drlukehompson.com is where you can find me. Other than that, my friends, that is all I have for you today. Stay nerdy out there, and I'll talk to you next time.